Everyone thinks a loose bolt brought down the deadliest aviation disaster in American history. The real culprit was far more sinister. On May 25, 1979, American Airlines Flight 191 lifted off from Chicago's O'Hare International Airport bound for Los Angeles. Aboard were 258 passengers and 13 crew members. 61 seconds after rotation, the aircraft plunged into a field near Des Plaines, Illinois. All 271 people aboard perished. For decades, the official narrative held firm. A maintenance error, specifically a bolt left loose during engine removal, had catastrophically failed. It's a clean story, verifiable, reassuring in its simplicity. But step closer to the evidence, this telegram here, filed by the National Transportation Safety Board, and the accepted explanation begins to crack, because the truth about Flight 191 wasn't negligence during a single maintenance shift. It was a design flaw that Douglas aircraft engineers had quietly documented years earlier, then largely ignored. Let's establish the orthodox account first. In March 1979, 2 months before the disaster, American Airlines performed routine maintenance on Flight 191 No. 1 engine, the left inboard Pratt & Whitney JT9D turbofan. The procedure required removing the entire engine pylon assembly. The accepted story says a mechanic failed to reinstall one critical fastener or installed it incorrectly. The engine, theoretically, should have been secure. It wasn't. According to the official findings, this single loose bolt meant that during takeoff, when aerodynamic forces reached their maximum, the engine mounting brackets failed. The No. 1 engine separated from the wing. But here's where the narrative gets interesting. The engine didn't simply fall away cleanly. Instead, it tore itself apart, severing hydraulic lines and damaging the leading edge of the wing. This cascade of failures disabled the aircraft's hydraulic systems, all three of them. Without hydraulic pressure, the pilots lost control of the flight surfaces. The DC-10 became, for all practical purposes, a gliding coffin. The investigation concluded, reports were filed. Aviation moved on armed with a preventive measure, more rigorous bolt-checking protocols. But in the years that followed, aeronautical engineers began asking uncomfortable questions. And if you examine the maintenance records, this stack of service bulletins right here, you'll see something the NTSB investigation didn't fully emphasize. Douglas Aircraft had issued a service bulletin in 1972, 7 years before the crash, specifically addressing engine pylon attachment problems. The bulletin warned that the pylon structure itself, not just the bolts, but the underlying aluminum casting, was prone to cracking under certain load conditions. Douglas engineers had identified a structural weakness inherent in the DC-10 design, yet the company did not mandate inspection of existing pylons on aircraft already in service. They issued a recommendation: voluntary compliance. American Airlines, like most carriers, didn't implement the service bulletin on their existing DC-10 fleet. It wasn't legally required. And here's the real pivot. When investigators examined the wreckage of Flight 191, they found evidence of pre-existing cracks in the pylon structure, cracks that had likely been growing for months or years before that fateful May morning. So what actually happened? The loose bolt didn't cause the failure, it was a symptom of the real problem. The pylon had already been cracking. When that engine was removed and reinstalled in March, the act of disturbing a weakened structure may have accelerated the existing damage. The bolt that failed to secure wasn't the origin point. It was merely the final domino. But the deeper indictment is this: Douglas Aircraft knew, or reasonably should have known, that the DC-10 pylon design carried a latent vulnerability. They issued a warning. The industry didn't uniformly adopt it, and 271 people died because a structural weakness, years in the making, finally gave way under the precise stress conditions of takeoff. The NTSB final report did eventually acknowledge the pre-existing cracks, but the headline, the public understanding, settled on the simpler narrative: a mechanic's error, a single loose bolt. That story is easier to prevent against. You tighten bolts, you implement checklists, you move forward. The harder story, that manufacturers sometimes ship designs with known limitations and regulators sometimes permit non-compliance, that's messier. In the aftermath, the FAA did issue Airworthiness Directive 79-13-09, mandating inspection of DC-10 pylons across the entire global fleet. The directive was retroactive. Thousands of aircraft were grounded. Many were found to have cracks. Some were repaired. Others were retired. The aviation industry tightened its grip on design accountability, at least in the short term. What Flight 191 ultimately revealed wasn't just a mechanical failure. It exposed a structural gap between what manufacturers know and what they are required to disclose, and between what regulators mandate and what industry voluntarily implements. The engine that tore itself apart on that May morning was only the visible rupture. The real fracture ran deeper, through systems of accountability that remain imperfect today. Subscribe, there's a new catastrophic failure, and the system that missed it waiting for you every week. Subscribe, there's a new catastrophic failure, and the system that missed it waiting for you every week.